Hi there, it is our Friday roundup.
Good morning.
And I'm finally feeling better. I was like sick for
I'm getting there, but my voice is still totally off, so we're actually going to film for the podcast on Monday.
Yeah, because we're going to film today. Okay, so I have something to talk about with Amazon and why it's frustrating me. That's going to come later. I want to respond to some reader comments, but what I really want to talk about today is some interesting comments that we got about some of the effects of complementarian dynamics on the family that we don't always talk about.
Yeah.
And the first was this one. A woman said that, because I often use the stat that says that the majority of complementarian marriages are actually functionally egalitarian.
Yeah.
Like, and by complementarian, Beth Allison Barr this week on the podcast gave an amazing definition of complementarianism. Yes, Beth Allison Barr was on our podcast, episode 275, talking about her new book, Becoming a Pastor's Wife. And I am doing a free webinar with Beth next Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. It is going to be awesome, but you have to register. So the link to register is in the podcast notes. There will be a recording available if you can't come live, but there'll be some prizes there. Anyway, Beth gave a wonderful definition of complementarianism, but it is this belief that God created men and women with different roles in both the church and the home. Mm-hmm. And in the home, the husband is an authority over the wife. And the way that we usually see this played out is that ultimately he gets to make the final decisions in things. Mm-hmm. And so I've been saying a lot of people believe this, but from our study, what we found is that 78.9% of couples actually make decisions together.
Yeah. So they might tout this as their theology, but in practical applications, they're not doing it.
Right. But, and here's where it got interesting. I had a woman comment, and then a bunch of people jumped in the comments too, saying she's not sure that's entirely what's going on. Because when she was in a complementarian marriage, when that's what they really believed, and it's different now, they're egalitarian, it's not that they made decisions together, it's that she never asked herself what she wanted. Because she just didn't think she had a voice. And so they never really got into those disagreements, because she just wasn't challenging herself to speak up. And now what she finds in an egalitarian marriage is the hardest part for her is learning, no, wait, I have to speak up. Mm-hmm. God gave me a brain and God wants me to use it. And so it's not okay for me to not have an opinion on things.
Yeah, we're not burying our talents anymore.
Yeah, now, obviously, not everyone has to have an opinion on everything. And if your spouse really wants to buy a new car and you couldn't care less, you're allowed to not have an opinion.
I have absolutely zero opinions on when Connor starts explaining what we need to do to fix the plumbing in the sink. I'm just like, la, 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 la.
Yes. So you're
no opinion. That's okay. He has zero opinion on how I store my yarn in the house.
Yeah.
Similar blah, blah, blah happening in his brain. So you don't actually have to have everything, but it's more like, again, it's this idea of burying our talents. Are you taking an easy route that's causing you to neglect gifts that God has given you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Terran Williams talked about this on the podcast that he did with me. He wrote an amazing book called How God Sees Women. Such a good book, and he's from South Africa, and people were really moved by his story on the podcast. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's really worth listening to. He's a pastor, and his church hired him to write up their document explaining why they were complementarian, and doing all the research, he realized that it doesn't make any sense, and he became egalitarian, and he's since left that church, and he's at a new one now. But he said that one of the big things as he and his wife transitioned into egalitarianism was, his wife had to learn to speak up, and he needed to give her room to speak up. Because it wasn't that they were disagreeing. It wasn't that they were fighting before. It was just that she didn't feel that was her role. And so it really did impact the family. So I thought that was interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now here's another one. That is, and that's kind of like, okay, that's too bad that happens. That's neat that women can learn to use their voices. But it's not like a big tragedy. Here's one that's a big tragedy.
Yeah.
Okay, and I want to read this because I think this is important. So a woman wrote to me and she said, and this was this was specifically about the book Love and Respect, which we have talked about.
And and as always, when we read messages that are sent in DMs rather than posted publicly, we've changed info so that the details are not the same.
Yes, so
the point is the same, the details are not.
Yeah, identifying stuff is taken out.
Exactly.
So she said, if you've ever talked about the family disasters when men refuse to respect their wives, well, what about my teens quickly mimicked the dehumanizing, authority-based treatment of me that they watched from their father? Trying to parent while your spouse messages their disdain for you and the men in the pulpit validate that message is like trying to grow a garden without light. This isn't just a marriage issue. Even though my husband has changed recently, the damage was done. Things are okay with my adult daughters now, but I've not had a relationship with my son or even met my grandchildren. What I do know, though, is that my son was abusive to his own wife after treating me and his sisters with disregard. Every penny earned from that book and many others should be put towards a victim's fund, and it could never ever begin to compensate for the damages. Knowing God knows is my only comfort. And then she goes on to say, if you don't respect your wife, you've cut off your children's ability to learn from and mature under their mother. The children, especially as teens, have more autonomy than their mother does, who can have every single thing she does overruled in a tiebreaker. Pretty soon, dad doesn't even bother talking to mom like adult co-parents, but colludes with kids directly for everything. Add often comorbid health issues, perimenopause, and pretty soon mom is completely devastated and unable to function, and mom is incapable, and the cycle continues. Yeah. And what she said about health issues, women have far more instances of immunocompromised disorders across the board, and they've been researching this forever. They won't be researching it anymore because you're not allowed in the US now to use the word woman in scientific research that's funded by the federal government. Yeah. So you're not allowed to, which is awful. So we can't publish our papers in the US about female sexual pain disorders now. Yeah. Because we can't use the word female in any scientific articles. But I hope people realize how crazy that is, that you can't do research into women's health anymore. Like if you're going to be funded by the federal government, even though women's bodies are not men's bodies and they react differently to drugs, but you now cannot use the word woman, uterus, et cetera, in scientific articles or research studies or research grants. Okay. But where was I going with this?
You're going with the comorbid health issues.
Yes, comorbid health issues. And there's a lot of study now thinking that a lot of it is trauma that is unprocessed, like just complex trauma causes all of these things. And when you're in a situation where your autonomy is gone and no one cares about your voice, that actually affects your health. Mm-hmm. And then, and like we found in our new book, The Marriage You Want, that unfairness threshold where you can put up with something as women for like the first 5 years of marriage, and then at 10 years, you're like, this is crazy. And at 15 years, you're just done. And at 20 years, it's awful. And you think about that 20-year period, which is when you've got teenagers. Yeah, you've hit perimenopause. You've had all of these years of, your immunocompromised issues coming up. Your body is feeling it. And you start falling apart just as your husband is trying to undermine you with the kids.
Well, the number of people that I know who, like, even just the little things, like the number of people I know who the husband doesn't ever really get up with the kids. Mm-hmm. And so she's constantly on a sleep deprived schedule, even when he's not. And it's like, well, he has to go to work. And it's like, yeah, but she also needs sleep, right? Like even just years and years of sleep deprivation can have massive health consequences. So like just there's all these little things that kind of can add up for women if we're not careful to pursue full equality, right? Like because the standard in our culture is, well, she should do that, or there's excuses for why. And we think that, we think stay-at-home moms deserve less sleep than men who work in offices as accountants. Yeah. And I'm like, no, actually, one of you is in charge of a human life. The other one is not, quite frankly. Yeah. And so there's just, it all adds up. And then if you're adding on this idea that women need to be under the authority of men, all this stuff, is it any surprise when these families tend to be ones where teenagers really don't respect their parents or their mom in particular? Like, I don't know. It's a pretty common story we get where it's like, my kids won't listen to me and they're going off the rails. And I remember even anecdotally, and this is full anecdote, from my experiences in high school and stuff, like the families that were the most patriarchal, their kids were up to the worst stuff. Because they just didn't listen. Because why would they? Mom's treated like a kid. They, like
and so this is why you gotta read The Marriage You Want. Oh, I had a copy and I took it for Jill yesterday, so it's not here anymore. I had one right here. But you gotta read The Marriage You Want, our new book, which launched last week, because it tells you how to get out of this and it shows you what actually works. And this doesn't work. Like they can say all they want that it works. But the fact is, it doesn't.
No.
Like, they can tell you all they want, that, oh, well, when men lead sacrificially, women do better. No, women do better when their voices count.
Well, what does leading sacrificially even mean? Because I'm sorry, I'm not seeing any sacrifice here. Like, if the real leading sacrificially is deciding to not lead, because that's the privilege that you have as men in these conservative cultures. It's like, if you're saying, well, men have to lead sacrificially. Okay, show me the sacrifice. I'm sorry, going to work is not a sacrifice. That's being a grown-up. Like...
No, and we don't need a man to lead. We need men to take initiative. Just as we need women to take initiative. It doesn't need to be a gendered thing. Marriages do better when both people take initiative, when both are committed to growth, when both are acting responsibly. So there you go. Check out The Marriage You Want. Okay, let's talk about Amazon. Okay. Seriously? Amazon? Oh my gosh. Okay, so many people who thankfully pre-ordered our book.
Thank you very much.
Lovely people. And we appreciate you. Had their orders, like, they're now getting messages that the book will be delivered April 20th or something crazy, even though we know there are thousands in the warehouse. And this is especially true in Canada. And a lot of people have actually had their orders canceled altogether, their pre-orders canceled. So I just want to say, if you pre-ordered your book and you're getting a message that it won't be delivered till April, cancel the pre-order and just reorder it. Because it'll get delivered tomorrow if you have Prime. Like, they have them. So weird. They just messed up the whole pre-order system, and it's not just our book. This is happening for other people's books too. The other thing that was happening this week is that everything was messed up. So, like, the audiobook was on its own. It wasn't connected to the book. And then when they connected the audiobook, they connected it to the study guide, not our actual book, because we have a study guide for The Marriage You Want with small group curriculum and premarital curriculum and everything. And everything was connected to the wrong thing, and you couldn't even find the right book. I checked right before we recorded, and it is now right. But it just makes me think there are other places to order other than Amazon.
There are.
And so on our landing page for The Marriage You Want, we've got links to bookshop.org. If you want to support a local bookshop, that's a great way to order if you're within the United States. And I think there's a similar thing in the UK. We've got Indigo, Coorong, ChristianBook.com, or even our publisher, Baker Books. If you're within the US, it's 30% off and you get free shipping within the US. So different options other than just Amazon. Because Amazon's being silly. Okay, last thing. I want to see if we can do this in a minute and a half. Okay. So we talked about Canada last week, and the U.S. War threat, because when you threaten to annex Canada, what you're saying is we're going to invade and kill Canadian civilians and go to war against you, because there is no other way to annex us. So they're saying annex, but that's what they mean. I got a lot of support. Thank you for that. And I know that there are people who really support the administration in a lot of ways. And we're glad you're here. Like, this is not a political podcast. So we are glad you're here because all of us of all political stripes need to learn about healthy marriages. That's great. But some people did share some things with me which simply aren't true. So I want to go through this. They said, you know what, we don't want to go to war with Canada, but we just want the drugs and the illegal immigrants to stop. Okay, 43 pounds of fentanyl crossed the border from Canada to the US last year. That's less than would go in a suitcase. 22,000 pounds crossed from Mexico. So it is minuscule. And if you look at opioids, far more crossed from the US into Canada than from Canada into the US.
Yeah, Canada actually has a drug crisis because of the US. The US does not have a drug crisis because of
Exactly.
Canada. And like, if you're worried about drug trade, you should be annexing yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So, like, we are not causing your drug trade. You're actually causing ours. And the difference is we know that the opioid crisis is a crisis. And so we are doing everything we can as a country to stop it. We have a lot of, we're trying to stop the opioid crisis. You know what else is a crisis for Canada is guns. Pretty much all of the gun shootings, or all of the shootings, all of the gang shootings in all of our major cities are caused from American guns.
We actually, fun fact is, everyone thinks Canada doesn't have guns. We actually have like a lot of guns.
Yeah.
The difference is our guns are primarily used for hunting purposes. We don't have self-defense.
We don't have handguns.
We don't have that. And so, like, and also you actually have to get a license. Like, it's very no nonsense, common sense gun laws. Yeah. And so we have highly armed populace, but we're armed against bears and moose. We're not armed against people. And so when we have shootings that are involved, they involve handguns, stuff like that, that's all due to the gun trade, the guns being smuggled in from the US. Yeah. So when it comes to border conflict issues, what actually is happening is the US is allowing more into Canada than Canada's allowing into the US.
And we are working on our opioid crisis. You're not doing anything about your gun crisis.
No.
And so, to say that because we're sending all the guns and drugs into Canada, and you guys are and American citizens, because it was American citizens who brought all the fentanyl into America, because American citizens are bringing some fentanyl into the US, means that we are going to try to economically destroy your country and we're going to go to war and invade you. That's not valid. And the other thing is, people are saying, well, we have such a huge trade deficit with Canada. Okay, the trade deficit is not 200 billion, as Trump was saying, it is 41 billion. If you take energy out of that, so oil and electricity, if you take that out of it, there's actually a trade surplus where Canada buys $63 billion more from you than you buy from us. Like, we are your best customer. Yeah. And to say, okay, because we get energy from a super, super close ally who's reliable, and they buy all our stuff, we're now going to go to war with you and kill your civilians? That doesn't make any sense. Nope. And so, again, I just ask that you think about these things and you do your own research.
And you do your own research looking into Canadian
CBC, BBC.
And I will say, for people who are like, yeah, but everything's biased. Well, right now the CBC is getting hammered because they're showing a right-wing bias. So if you're right-wing in the States, you can look at the CBC and realize that they're getting hammered for having a right-wing bias right now.
Yeah. So like, just do your own research, because the rhetoric isn't true.
Yeah.
And this isn't okay. We're your friends. Like, I've been in all 50 states and now I can't.
And also, like, for people who are watching the podcast, just so you are aware, we live in the area that is marked for invasion.
Yeah.
So, like, we might have to flee.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're so passionate about this. Mm-hmm. And if, like, yeah, like, and that's just something that...
If that ever happened and I didn't use my platform to speak up, I would feel terrible. So, yeah. So we're just trying to clear up some misinformation. Thank you for listening. We are the True North, strong and free.
Elbows up.
Elbows up. And check out the marriage you want, because then you can be respected as a woman and not get immunocompromised and have...
Okay, we cannot... Their marriage team is not officially promoting the concept that our book prevents immunodisorders. That is not an official stance of the Bear Marriage team. That has not been studied in a randomized controlled trial. That is purely vibes-based, which is, by the way, not a research study method. We did a vibes-based research method. No, like, that's not a thing. So,
but you can still have a healthier marriage and a happier marriage. So check out the marriage you want, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.